A silver breakfast tray flew across the throne hall and cracked against the floor. Bread rolled under the tables. A bowl of broth splashed across white ceremonial furs. Guards spun toward the throne, hands dropping to their blades. On the dais, a huge man rose halfway out of his seat, broth dripping down the fur draped over his shoulders. Nobody in that hall had ever seen anyone throw food at him alive, and the woman who did it, she didn't run. She planted her feet, folded her arms over her round frame, and glared up at him like he was a child who'd skipped supper. His name was Dominic Varga, Alpha King of the Ironwood Pack. For 9 long winters no one had heard him laugh. What this plump kitchen maid did next made every guard in that room forget how to breathe. Stay with me on this one. Let me back up. 3 weeks before that tray ever hit the floor, Lydia Marsh walked up the mountain road to the fortress with everything she owned tied in a single cloth sack. The Ironwood fortress sat high in the Carpathian highlands, gray stone against a gray sky, wolves for a garrison and silence for a welcome. Everyone who worked inside those walls knew the rules by heart. Don't look the king in the eye. Don't speak unless spoken to. And whatever you do, don't make a sound anywhere near his chambers. Because the Alpha King did not tolerate noise. Truth be told, he didn't tolerate much of anything. 9 winters back, on the night of the Old Alliance feast, a rival pack had come through the mountain pass under a truce banner and turned that feast into a slaughter. When the smoke cleared, the king's mate, Queen Rebecca, was dead. So were 40 of his people. Dominic Varga hunted the killers across 2 long winters until not one of them drew breath. And when the blood was finished, he came home. And he stopped laughing, stopped eating like a living man, stopped letting anyone near him except one old gray wolfhound named Bran. Bran had been Rebecca's dog first. After she died, the animal never left the king's side, not once, not for a single night. Now here's the thing about Lydia. She'd scrubbed scullery pots her whole life, down in the lowland manors until her hands cracked. She was 30 years old, wide in the hip, soft in the arm, quick in the mouth, and she had zero patience for men who felt sorry for themselves. She didn't know any of the fortress rules yet. And when the head cook, a nervous woman named Petra, listed them off, Lydia just laughed. "He's a man," Lydia said. "Men eat or they die. Which is it going to be?" Petra went white. "Don't talk like that here. The last 3 girls we sent to his chambers ran off down the mountain in the dark. One of them didn't come back at all." "Ran off from what? Did he touch them?" "No, he never touches anyone. He just looks at you, like you're already a ghost and he's too tired to grieve one more." Lydia didn't say anything to that, but something in her chest pulled tight and she couldn't have told you why. They put her on the king's chambers because nobody else would go. Every morning before the sun cleared the peaks, Lydia carried a heavy tray up the winding stair. Bread, broth, cheese. Sometimes a bit of venison. And every morning she carried it back down again, cold and untouched, and scraped it into the pig trough. She watched him during those first weeks, couldn't help it. The Alpha King was enormous, the way old warriors get, a thick neck and shoulders that filled a doorway. But his eyes had gone hollow. His face had gone gray. He sat by the cold window for hours with his hand on Bran's head, staring out at the pass where his mate had died, and he did not eat. The other servants trembled around him. Lydia found she couldn't. What she felt looking at him wasn't fear. It was closer to anger. Here was a man with a whole pack that needed him, a whole kingdom, and he was choosing to rot in a chair. One thing, though, that dog, Bran, kept doing something strange. Every time Lydia set the tray down, the old wolfhound lifted his head off the floor and sniffed the air toward her. Long, slow pulls of breath. His ears would come up. His tail would thump once against the stone. Then he'd whine, low and confused, and put his head back down. She thought maybe he smelled the kitchen on her. The scullery smoke got into everything. Into her hair, her clothes, her skin. She smelled of wood smoke and lard and old ash, and she'd stopped noticing it years ago. But Bran noticed. And every single morning that dog looked at her like he was trying to remember something. By the end of the second week, Lydia had had enough of watching a man starve. She started staying in the room. She'd set the tray down and then just wait, fold her hands. "Stand there." "You can go," Dominic said the first time, not even turning his head. His voice was rough from disuse. "I'll go when you eat." That got her a look, the first real look he'd given anyone in a long time, but she held it, chin up, and after a moment he turned back to the window and she left the cold tray behind. She did it again the next day, and the next. She never raised her voice. She just stood there like a stubborn stone in a river, and slowly, day by day, the king started to notice she existed. He didn't eat, but he noticed. And in that fortress, being noticed by the Alpha King was either the best thing that could happen to you or the very last. Then came the frostbitten morning that changed everything. Lydia came up the stair with the tray and found the chambers empty. A guard told her the king was holding court in the throne hall, which he did maybe once a month, sitting on the black stone throne while his war captains brought him grievances he barely answered. Any sensible servant would have set the tray in his rooms and gone back to the kitchen. Lydia was not, on that particular morning, a sensible servant. She'd been up half the night with a toothache and a bad feeling she couldn't name, and she was tired and she was done. She carried the tray straight into the throne hall. The place went quiet the second she crossed the threshold. A kitchen maid in the throne hall during court. Captains turned. Guards stiffened. And there on the black throne sat Dominic Varga, wrapped in the white ceremonial furs of the ironwood line, looking down at his own hands like they belonged to a stranger. Lydia marched up the center of that hall. Her wooden clogs cracked against the stone, loud in all that silence. Bran, lying at the foot of the dais, scrambled up onto his old legs and started wagging his tail like she was the first good thing he'd seen all winter. A captain stepped to block her. "You cannot." "Move," she said, and something in her voice made him move. She climbed the dais steps and held the tray out toward the king, both hands an offering. Bread, broth, cheese, same as every morning. Dominic looked at it. Then he looked at her, and his voice came out flat and dead. "Take it away." And that was the moment something in Lydia just snapped clean through. Because she was looking at a man who had everything: a crown, a pack, a fortress, a whole mountain of people who would die for him, and he was throwing it all away one cold breakfast at a time. She thought of the 3 girls who'd run down the mountain in the dark. She thought of the way the servants flinched. She thought of 9 years of a great man turning himself into a ghost out of grief, and how grief like that is real, it is. But it is also, at some point, a choice. "No," Lydia said. The whole hall stopped breathing. "No," Dominic rose an inch off the throne. "You forget where you stand, girl." "I know exactly where I stand." Her voice was shaking now, but not with fear. "I stand in front of a king who's decided the whole world can go cold because his own heart did. You want to grieve her? Fine. Grieve her till the mountains fall. But grieve her alive, you great stubborn fool, because she didn't die so you could starve yourself into a matching corpse." Guards reached for their blades. A captain shouted her name. And Lydia, God help her, turned the tray over and dumped the king's untouched breakfast straight down the front of his ceremonial furs. Broth ran down the white fur in a brown streak. A wedge of cheese bounced off his knee. Bread tumbled down the dais steps. The empty tray rang against the stone like a bell. For one whole heartbeat, nobody in the ironwood fortress moved. Dominic Varga stood up to his full and terrible height, broth dripping off him, and stared down at the round little kitchen maid who had just done the single most insane thing anyone had done in that hall in 9 years. Blades came out of their sheaths. Somewhere a guard whispered a prayer for her. Lydia lifted her chin and waited to die. And then the Alpha King threw back his head. And he laughed. It started as a rough bark, like a door that hadn't opened in years. Then it broke loose, deep and rolling, shaking his whole chest, filling the hall right up to the rafters. He laughed until he had to grab the arm of the throne. He laughed until tears cut down through the broth on his face. And old Bran, hearing a sound he must have thought was gone forever, lifted his gray muzzle to the ceiling and howled along, a long, joyful, cracking howl. The guards lowered their blades and stood there with their mouths hanging open. The captains looked at each other like the sky had split, because that laugh, that was the king they'd lost. That was the man from before. Lydia just stood there, dripping tray in hand, and thought, dazed, well, at least I'll die having actually done something. But she didn't die. When the laughter finally wound down, Dominic wiped his face with the back of one huge hand, and he looked at her. And for the first time in 9 winters, his eyes weren't hollow. They were wet and startled and almost young. "Sit," he said, hoarse. "Sit down and eat with me. Bring another tray, bring 2. And that, believe me, was only where the story really started. If you're still with me, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because what happens next is the part nobody in that fortress saw coming. Here's what nobody in the hall understood yet, least of all Lydia. That evening the whole fortress buzzed like a kicked hive. The king had laughed. The king had eaten. 2 full bowls at the throne itself, across from a kitchen maid who scolded him like a mother. The story ran down every corridor by nightfall. Some called it a miracle. Some called it madness. A few of the older wolves went very quiet and didn't call it anything at all, because a few of them remembered. Dominic ordered Lydia moved up to a proper room near the kitchens. He ordered her to bring his meals herself, everyone, and to stay while he ate them, and to keep on scolding him if he tried to quit. She did. Within days the color was coming back into the king's face. He walked the walls again. He sat in his captain's councils and actually spoke. The pack felt it, the way a pack always feels the health of its alpha, and something loosened across the whole fortress, like a held breath finally let go. Lydia told herself it was a good thing she'd done. Told herself she should be glad and go on being a servant and keep her head down now that the king's eye was on her. But the dog would not leave her alone. Bran followed her everywhere now. Down the stairs, through the kitchens. He'd press his gray head against her leg and breathe her in and let out that same low, searching whine. At night, he scratched at her door until she let him in, and then he'd lie across her feet like he was guarding her, or maybe like he was afraid she'd vanish before morning. "He likes you," Dominic said one evening, watching the old hound settle at Lydia's feet by the fire. There was warmth in the king's voice now, warmth that surprised them both. "He never liked anyone, not since, not for a long time. He keeps smelling me." Lydia scratched the dog's ears. "Like I've got something on me, probably just the kitchen smoke." Dominic went still. Something crossed his face then, a shadow, a memory. He leaned forward and, without quite meaning to, breathed in the way a wolf does when it's trying to understand something. His nostrils flared. His brow drew down, but the scullery smoke was thick on her, wood smoke and ash and lard baked in over years, and whatever lay under it, he couldn't reach it. Not yet. He sat back. He rubbed a hand over his face, and he told himself it was nothing, but it wasn't nothing. And deep down in the animal part of him that never stopped listening, Dominic Varga already knew it wasn't. That's where I want to leave that evening. Warm fire, sleeping dog. A king finally eating, finally laughing, a woman finally settled. It looked, for those few quiet days, like the whole thing was over. Like the story had found its happy ending early. It hadn't. Not even close. The trigger came 4 nights later, and it came from the dog. Lydia was carrying an armful of firewood down the cold corridor when Bran came around the corner at a dead run and slammed into her legs. The wood scattered. And this time the old hound didn't whine. This time he threw his head back and howled, right there in the corridor. A wild, ringing, grief-torn howl that brought guards running from 3 directions. Then he seized the hem of her skirt in his teeth and pulled. Something had come loose from under her collar in the tumble. A thin cord she'd worn against her skin her whole life, tucked so deep she'd stopped feeling it. On the end of it hung a small, tarnished silver pendant, a crescent moon with a wolf curled inside it. The clasp had broken. It swung free against her chest, out of the smoke, out of the smell of the kitchen, into open air for the first time in years. Bran went utterly rigid, and then he pressed his nose to that pendant and let out a sound Lydia had never heard an animal make, a sound like weeping. Dominic Varga was in the throne hall when he heard the howl. He came out of that room like a storm, and when he saw the old dog pressed against the maid's chest, he stopped so hard his boots skidded on the stone. Because he knew that pendant. He had given it to Rebecca on the night they were mated, a crescent moon with a wolf curled inside. There was only one in the whole world. He had watched them lower his mate into the cold ground 9 winters ago, and he had thought that pendant went into the earth with her. "Where?" the king said. His voice had dropped to something that wasn't quite human. The corridor went dead silent. Guards backed away from him. "Where did you get that?" Lydia's hand closed over the pendant. Her face had gone white. "I've always had it. Since I was a girl, it's mine." "That is a lie." He crossed the corridor in 3 strides, and for the first time she saw the alpha in him, the thing the whole mountain was afraid of, and it towered over her. "That pendant belonged to my mate. It went into her grave. So you will tell me, right now, how it came to be hanging around the neck of a scullery maid who wandered up my mountain out of nowhere. And here is the thing. In one breath, the whole nature of it had changed. A moment ago this was a story about a grieving king and the woman who made him laugh again. Now there was a war alpha standing over Lydia with grief and fury pouring off him like heat off a forge, and a corridor full of armed wolves who had just watched their king go from healed to hunting in the space of a single howl. Now it wasn't about a cold breakfast. It was about the worst night of Dominic Varga's life, and whether the woman in front of him was somehow tangled in it. "I don't know," Lydia's voice cracked. "I swear to you I don't. I was a child. I don't remember getting it. I only remember it was always there, and that I was told never to take it off, never to let anyone see it." "Told by who?" "I don't know. The woman who raised me. She wasn't my mother. She found me," she said, "on the road, half froze. She said a lady put me in her cart in the dark and told her to run and never bring me back to the mountains." Tears were running down Lydia's face now. "I've spent my whole life not knowing. I only came back up here because it was work and I was hungry and something in me wanted to see the place I dreamed about." Dominic stood frozen. Bran howled again, low now, and pressed himself between the 2 of them, looking up at his master, then up at Lydia, back and forth, whining, insisting on something the man was too afraid to hear. "The night of the feast," the king said slowly. "How old are you?" 30. "You would have been," his throat worked. "You would have been 12 that winter." Nobody moved. Somewhere down the corridor a torch popped. The whole fortress seemed to lean in. "There was a girl," Dominic said, and his voice had gone strange and far away. "A kitchen child. In the chaos when the blades came out. Rebecca pulled a child out from under a table. I saw it. It was the last thing I saw her do before they cut me off from her. She had a girl in her arms and she was running for the kitchen door, running her out, saving her, and then the crowd closed and I lost sight of them both, and when I fought back through, Rebecca was on the ground, and there was no child anywhere. We searched. We thought the girl had died in the burning wing. We thought." He stopped. He couldn't finish. Lydia was shaking her head, slow tears dropping off her chin, but her hand had gone to her mouth, because far down in the bottom of her memory, in the place she never let herself look, there was a woman's face. A woman with kind eyes and a warrior's arms, lifting her up out of the noise and the fire, pressing something small and cold into her small hands, folding her fingers over it. Keep this. Keep it safe. Don't ever take it off. Run, little one, run and live. She had spent 29 years telling herself it was a dream. She put you in a cart, Dominic whispered. She got you out, with her own pendant around your neck, so that if you were ever found, if you ever came home, someone would know you were hers. She was still thinking of you, in her last minutes on this earth. She was still trying to save you. The king of the ironwood pack sank down onto his knees in the middle of that cold corridor, a giant of a man folding down to the height of a plump, weeping kitchen maid, and he reached out with one enormous, shaking hand, and he did the thing his wolf had been begging him to do for 3 weeks. He leaned in, and he breathed her in, past the smoke, past the ash, past 29 years of scullery grime and hiding and forgetting, and underneath all of it, faint and unmistakable, worn into her very skin from a single desperate embrace on the worst night of both their lives, his wolf found the scent of Rebecca. Dominic Varga made a sound then that no one in that fortress ever forgot. Not a howl, not a sob, something torn straight out of the center of him, 9 years of grief and guilt and unbearable love breaking loose all at once. "It's you," he said. "You're the girl, you're the one she died for, you're the last thing she touched." He wept openly, on his knees, the great Alpha King in front of his whole guard, and not one of them looked away, because half of them were weeping too. Bran shoved his head under the king's arm and licked the tears off his master's face and thumped his tail against the stone, and it was almost like the old dog was saying, "Finally, I told you every morning. Finally, you listened." Lydia could barely stand. Her whole life, every unanswered question, every cold night, every time she'd wondered why an orphan scullery girl dreamed of gray mountains she'd never seen. All of it turned over in her chest at once and rearranged itself into something whole. "She saved me," Lydia breathed. "The Queen. She saved me, and it cost her, and I never even knew her name." "Rebecca." Dominic took Lydia's soft hands in his huge ones and pressed them to his own chest, over his hammering heart, so she could feel it beat. "Her name was Rebecca, and she would have loved you. She loved you already at the end. She spent her death loving you." They knelt there together, the king and the maid, for a long time. The guards, one by one, sheathed their blades and dropped to one knee in the corridor, not out of fear, but out of something none of them had felt in 9 years. Awe and relief, and a strange, bone-deep sense that the pack had just gotten back 2 of its lost, all in one night. That should have been the end of the fear. But there was one more thing, and it woke in Dominic the moment his wolf caught Rebecca's scent underneath her own. Because there was Rebecca's scent on Lydia, but there was also Lydia's own. And his wolf, waking up fully for the first time in nearly a decade, sat up inside him and looked at this stubborn, laughing, soft, brave woman kneeling in front of him, and it recognized something a grieving man's mind had been too broken to see. Faded. The pull hit Dominic so hard he swayed on his knees. Not a betrayal of Rebecca, not a replacement. He understood it all in a single, staggering rush, the way you understand a thing you should have known all along. Rebecca had not just saved a child. In her last living act, she had saved and marked and sent away the one person in all the world who would one day walk back up this mountain and drag her broken mate back into the land of the living. She had, with her dying breath, given him a reason to laugh again. "Oh," Dominic said softly, and he almost laughed again through the tears at the enormous, impossible mercy of it. "Oh, Rebecca, you clever, stubborn woman, you planned this. You planned all of it." "Planned what?" Lydia whispered. He looked at her. really looked. At the round cheeks flushed with cold and crying, at the strong soft arms, at the sharp mouth that had scolded a king into eating, at the fierce eyes that had refused to tremble when every blade in the hall was drawn. And Dominic Varga, who had loved exactly one person in his whole life and thought he would never love another, felt his heart, long dead, roll over and begin to beat for two. "She sent me you," he said. "She knew she was going. And somehow she made sure that one day the girl she saved would grow up and come home and save me right back. You didn't just make me laugh, Lydia Marsh. My wolf knows you. It has known you since the first morning you carried up that tray and refused to leave. That's why the dog followed you. That's why I ate. It wasn't only the scolding. It was you. It's always going to be you." Lydia, who had never in her whole hard life been anybody's first choice, let alone anybody's fated one, opened her mouth and found she had, for once, absolutely nothing sharp to say. So she said the only true thing left. "Then get up off your knees," she whispered, wiping his face with her rough thumb, the way you'd wipe a child's. "Kings don't kneel in cold hallways. And you're going to catch your death. And I did not come all the way up this mountain to nurse another stubborn man back from the edge." And Dominic Varga laughed, wet and cracked and free. They didn't rush it. That's the part I want you to hear because it matters. He was a man who had been broken a long time, and she was a woman who had been alone a long time, and neither of them was foolish enough to think a single night in a cold corridor undid all of that. Grief doesn't work that way. Love doesn't either. But they had time now, and for the first time in 9 years, Dominic wanted the time. He had Rebecca's grave tended and a new stone set. On it he had them carve, beneath the Queen's name, a single line: "She saved 2 lives that night." Lydia learned it later and cried for an hour, then cooked the whole fortress a feast, because that was how she grieved and how she loved, with her hands and with food, and nobody in that kitchen argued with her about anything ever again. The pack took to her the way packs do, all at once and completely. She was too loud and too soft and too honest to fear, and she scolded the war captains as readily as she scolded the king, and within a season the great cold fortress smelled of bread and roasting meat and wood smoke that meant home instead of hiding. The servants stopped flinching. Children ran in the halls. Old Bran got fat and happy and slept by the great hearth with his gray head in Lydia's lap, and some mornings, if you listened, you could hear the Alpha King laughing at his own breakfast table, an ordinary sound the whole mountain had once thought it would never hear again. He courted her properly in the old way, which made her tease him mercilessly, and which he loved. He brought her wildflowers she pretended not to want. He learned that she took her tea strong, and her arguments head-on, and her tenderness only when she thought no one was watching. She learned that under all that terrible sighs and grief was a man who felt everything far too deeply, which was exactly why losing Rebecca had nearly killed him, and exactly why he was worth the trouble. The night he asked her to be his mate, he didn't do it on the throne. He did it in the kitchen, with flour on his sleeve because she'd put him to work, and he got down again on those same knees, and Lydia rolled her eyes and hauled him up by the collar and kissed him before he could ruin a perfectly good moment with a speech. "Yes," she said against his mouth. "Obviously yes, you great sad wolf. Now stir the pot before it burns." When the mate mark took, when his wolf and her heart bound together for good, Lydia finally understood the thing Dominic had understood on his knees in the corridor. That love doesn't run out. That a heart can grieve one person forever and still open wide enough for another. That Rebecca wasn't a door she'd closed, but a door Rebecca herself had held open, all the way to the end, with the last strength she had. Sometimes, on frostbitten mornings, Lydia carries a tray up the winding stair the way she used to. Not because she has to. She's the queen of the Ironwood pack now, and there are a dozen servants who'd fight for the honor. She does it because she likes to. She sets it down in front of her mate, and she folds her arms over her round frame and she waits. And every single time, Dominic looks up at the woman his dead mate sent to save him, and he remembers a broth-soaked morning and a thrown tray and the first laugh in 9 years, and he eats every bite, and he thanks whatever mercy runs the world that the stubborn kitchen maid refused to tremble. That's the whole story. A king who lost everything, a queen who died still saving, a frightened girl on the road with a moon around her neck, and a plump, sharp-tongued woman who marched into a silent throne hall, dumped a king's breakfast down his ceremonial furs, and gave a whole grieving mountain its heart back. 9 years without a laugh. And then one loud, ordinary morning, everything changed. Stay warm out there. And if somebody in your life has gone quiet and cold and given up on the good things, maybe be the one who refuses to tremble. Maybe carry them the tray anyway. You never know what one stubborn act of love might crack back open.